At Carafem, you can choose the abortion care that works best for you. With in-person visits in Atlanta, Chicago, and the DC area, or medically supported abortion pills by mail in 20 states. Some people feel more comfortable meeting with a provider in person and leaving either no longer pregnant or with pills in hand. Others prefer getting abortion pills by mail. Just fill out a short online form, and if eligible, your medication arrives in a few days in a plain package. When you choose abortion pills, Cara, our text-based abortion companion, is with you every step of the way, offering 24/7 support and answers whenever you need them. However you get care, Carafem will support you every step of the way. Learn more at carafem.org.
There are so many ways we're denied our sexual freedoms. Sometimes by others and sometimes even by ourselves. For example, I grew up in a culture where the moment you became a mother, it was like your sexuality just vanished. There's also this shared experience I've noticed among survivors of sexual trauma. This idea that once you've been harmed, your own desire no longer belongs to you. Once again, there seems to be this societal struggle to hold space for both victimhood and sexual desire in the same person. But in this episode, I'm speaking to someone who's not only managed to reject a lot of repressive and abusive beliefs and practices, but also has managed to reclaim her freedom in the most powerful way. Someone who's carved out her own path to sexual liberation despite everything that tried to take it away from her. Today, I'm talking to someone I'm genuinely proud to call a dear friend, Payzee Mahmod. Payzee is an activist, a campaigner, and a leader at Obama Foundation. She's been instrumental in changing the law on child marriage in England and Wales, a work that's deeply rooted in her own lived experiences. She was just a teenager when she was forced to marry a much older man, a stranger. By 18, she was already divorced. But that same month, she had to arrange her sister Banaz's funeral. Banaz never managed to escape her own arranged marriage. She was murdered in a so-called honor killing. That loss is one of the many unimaginable scars of Payzee's past that fuels her tireless work. Her story makes me ask, how can we try to reclaim our own sexual freedom in a world that seems to be trying to take it away from us? I'm Sahar, a journalist on a quest to understand the world through the lens of how people do sex. When was the first time that you truly felt sexy, that you became aware that you are a sexual being?
The first time, oh my God. Okay, so I think there's going to be two moments. The first one is going to be the kind of like, I'm perceiving myself as sexy because of what other people perceive as sexy or what my understanding of sexy is. And I think that's probably kind of like when I was like 18, 19 and getting compliments from especially men and kind of leaning into like, oh, they think I'm sexy, so I must be sexy. But I didn't feel sexy. But then I think like truly feeling sexy was probably in my early 20s when I kind of really was getting into like my style and expressing myself differently in fashion, doing my hair and having my nails done, just like feeling sexy for myself. Like, okay, I look good, I look sexy, I feel sexy. So probably not until my, I'd say like mid 20s.
Isn't it funny? Like, youth and being young is always associated with, being attractive, the height of your beauty, the height of your sexiness, if you would. And I didn't feel sexy. Like, I actually really relate to you. When you were at that age where everyone was checking you out, everyone wanted to like get with you. That's probably when I felt the least sexy. I felt quite like self-conscious, as if, I don't know, as if I was a phony, as if they're going to find out that I'm not what they think I am. And like the older I'm becoming, the more comfortable in myself I'm becoming, and the more sexy I'm feeling. Is that
Yeah.
is that the case for you?
Yeah, totally. Because I think it's now about what perceiving what feels sexy for me and not necessarily to the outside world. And I think when you're kind of, I think especially as women, like your understanding of feeling sexy or being sexy is all shaped by the way people maybe react to you or like the way they make you understand being sexy. So it's not really your understanding, your expression. But definitely as I've gotten older, my feeling of being sexy, owning that feeling, like really coming down to me, has been like completely transformational. And like when I think back to when I thought I was sexy, I'm like, gosh, I didn't feel sexy at all. It was like one big act, just like, oh, he thinks I'm sexy. So yeah, I'm sexy. Like, one big act really, because I didn't realize like feeling sexy was truly coming down to like inner confidence. That's like it's not some shit you can fake. This is like really innate and it comes from within.
Yeah, and you mentioned it's something you were taught. And of course, we are taught by a society as we grow up, but essentially it begins at home within family. And I know about your family and your background. You were brought up in quite a repressed, not just societies, but in a family that was putting a lot of pressure on you where sex wasn't even spoken about. Tell me about how you were taught about sex in home, how that was even spoken about.
So, sex wasn't spoken about as a topic in itself, but sex was talked about as this mysterious kind of taboo thing that you should like try your best to stay away from it, not to do anything that is associated to sex. And I remember being told by my mum, especially, that sitting a certain way, and I'm talking like as young as like 6, 7, like 5, sitting a certain way would show like my private parts. And opening my legs when I'm playing would be very detrimental because it could potentially mean I won't be a girl anymore. Now, obviously, I didn't understand what that meant, but basically, what she was trying to say is that I'll break my hymen. And that would be, my virginity is at stake. This virginity, this thing was, the ultimate piece of gold, so to speak, to really protect, to savor, and to honor in every way possible. Because I learned from a really young age what lies in between my legs, my virginity, will ultimately be the most important thing, not just in my life, but in my entire family's life. It basically upheld their entire being, their entire meaning, what they stood for. And so we never ever spoke about sex in itself, like what it was to have healthy relationships, what it was to have sex, consent. It was more like avoid the topic at all costs. Anything that is sex related is bad, is sinful, is haram, don't go near it. But at the same time, any little thing could be associated to sex. So, I couldn't ride a bike. As a little girl, I again was told I could break my hymen. As I was getting into my teens, I remember not really being allowed to wear like makeup, perfume outside of the house, because all these things were like little things that led to being sexy, to wanting sex, to initiating sex. And they were just such simple things. But for my family, they were bigger representations of the word sex and everything associated to that sin.
So you were brought up in this environment that where sex, not sex, like you don't even talk about it, but sexuality was this mysterious taboo thing that took over everything, that kind of defined your value as a girl, as a person. How did being brought up in this environment impact you as like a person, as the way you view yourself, the way you view the world, especially while you were growing up?
It affected me massively. So when I was forced into a marriage at 16, at this point, I still didn't know what sex was. I didn't know the act of sex because I had never been I'd never had access to sex education. And so I ended up partaking in non-consensual sex with the man that I was forced to marry, but I didn't know what that was. I had never ever, I hadn't seen porn at this stage. I hadn't talked about sex with my friends. I hadn't ever seen it in magazines. It was essentially non-existent to me at this age, which for most people by 16, kind of aware of what sex is, especially, like with the digital world. But for me, it was something that was not even part of my consciousness. It was something that I had to do to prove my virginity to my family through a white sheet virginity test, essentially. And so I think the way it affected me, first of all, I was kind of pushed blindly into having sex, into being forced to having sex with somebody, to show my family that I was a virgin. But when I left my marriage at 18 and I ended up having consensual relationships, my relationship with sex or being sexy was very unhealthy. It was the complete extreme other end where it was like, well, I need to be as sexy as possible, perceived sexiness. I need to be, the most hypersexual being because anyway, that's what I've been told that you're not allowed to be, but somehow everything you do is that anyway. So I ended up going completely the other way and feeling like really restricted in expressing myself and I just remember my behavior like in my early 20s just being such a hypersexual over the top, very expressive, and thinking that everything I do has to be flirtatious, has to be all my communication, particularly with the opposite sex, just had to be very extreme. Like being so confused at home led me to just go all out, be as sexy as you want to be, even though it was all like pretense and
What
fake
does
and
that even mean to you, though, being hypersexual, putting it all out? What did it look like?
dressing very provocatively. It meant choosing outfits that were, for example, something that I was really obsessed with at the time was showing my underwear because that was like the very sexy thing to do. Wearing a thong, like making sure that was visible, and wearing the smallest tops possible because that's what my being like ultimately meant anyway. I was just like a sexual being. I was just supposed to be a symbol of, what a man would find attractive, what he would find sexy.
And it was also like your way of fighting back against the repression against like all of the people. Like you weren't just trying to be sexy, but you were trying to, I guess, what I'm hearing is to fight back all of those pressures and the shame and the everything that they put you through, which we're going to talk about, for which you ended up having to pay a huge price for.
Absolutely. Yeah. In my mind, the way I thought of it was if I'm super sexual, if I am hypersexual, I'm basically taking charge of this. I'm being everything that you're saying I'm not allowed to be. But actually, in the midst of it, I was only like harming myself because I didn't, this wasn't the hypersexualness and the, over the top behavior. It wasn't what I felt like comfortable doing and enjoying. It was more like, well, I'm supposed to be suppressed by men. At least that's what I've been, being taught and being raised to kind of live in a way where I'm being suppressed by men. But actually, I've got something I can suppress you with. And that's how I used to think of it. And it's like, I can get as many men as possible. And it's not always in the sense of, having sexual relationships, but just knowing that I flirted with somebody enough to get their attention. I know that basically I've scored here and just being like very hypersexual and flirting with them and getting their attention. And it kind of became a tool of, well, I can control men too, and I won't necessarily be controlled. But actually, I came to realize, no, I was still being controlled. And the thing is, I'm sitting here thinking I'm taking control back. No, because I'm still doing it to play this game in the patriarchal world. Do you know what I mean? So it kind of like backfired on me where I thought, oh shit. Well, that wasn't really for me. It's you're still benefiting from it because I'm still doing, something under that system that I basically was raised in. So I think it's when I really unpicked that and thought, no, I'm just wasting my time and energy trying to score what I think is actually going to help me. But on an emotional level, this is so draining, So I think I'm still working through it and still um, particularly because of some of my like difficult experiences within sexual relationships. I'm still kind of kind of coming to grips with some things. It was only in my 30s that I kind of discovered or started talking a little bit more about the connection between sex and female genital mutilation, which I've been subjected to. And so I think there's so many layers, and it's really one of those things that just takes so long because as we grow and as we evolve, and even our relationship with our bodies and what it feels to be sexy. And I'm almost 40 now, so my body's changing, and it is such a journey, and it's so layered, and it's like constantly having the reflections and questions and coming back to, is this serving me? Is this for me? Or am I still playing this game for the bloody patriarchy? Do you know what I mean? That somebody's benefiting from, and it's men.
So let's take a moment back, go back to your childhood, because I do want us to talk about all the things you've been through and how you've ended up being where you are now. You mentioned FGM.
Yeah.
Can you run me through when that happened, how it happened, what you remember from it?
Yeah, so I don't remember much, if I'm very honest, Sahar. And this is quite common with girls who have been subject to FGM. And I think there's a real kind of fight or flight mode that you go into, and it's such a painful experience that you just shut off literally from what's happening to you. But what I do remember, so for context, at this time, me and my family were living in Iran because my parents had fled the war in Iraq, which is where we're originally from, Iraqi Kurdistan, and they'd moved across the border to Iran, Kurdistan. And at this time, my whole family, my dad's brothers, their wives and their families and his parents, we were all living under one roof. So one big, big, very common in our communities, one big family. And there came a point when my dad's mum decided that all the girls in the house, ranging from, 5, 6, 7, all the way until 14, everybody has to be cut. And at the time, women would go around like elderly women, cutters, with obviously no expertise in any medical procedures. Usually women who had like problems with their eyesight. I'm talking women in their 60s, 70s, who were doing such dramatic procedures on girls, with obviously unhygienic tools. Again, no expertise, and just kind of doing this freehand. So literally a cutting tool, usually a razor, is used, and uh, the clit either apart or the full clit is removed. And essentially the driver behind that is, this is the part of the woman's body, the girl's body, that causes them to experience sexual pleasure. And therefore, if they don't have it, they're less likely to go and seek sexual pleasure. And so these women would knock on doors and, offer something like £1. They'll do it all the gals. It was kind of like a source of income for them, but just a bit of change. So that's to tell you the impact it has versus the people carrying this out. For them, it's like, I'm just getting a bit of change and doing basically what needs to be done to all these gals. So this woman's come knocking on the door. My grandma said, today's the day everyone's being cut. And basically, me, all my three siblings. At the time, my baby sister was very, very small. So all me and my three siblings and my cousins, all girl cousins, were cut on the same day. And the only, I think it was about 7. Yeah, I think it was about 7. And my eldest, I think she was about 13 or 14. So all of us were cut on the same day at the same time. It was very quick. The only kind of memory I do have from it, I just remember the chaos. I just remember the feeling of like, this is so chaotic, because there was a lot of screaming, and it was like, all the mothers would be in the same room, or all the girls. It was just so chaotic, like girls trying to run out of the door. It was just really, really chaotic, but chaotic in the sense that you could just feel the atmosphere was so heavy and so painful, and it just screaming over the other screaming, and my grandma being angry. There was just so much tension. Um, so I don't remember being cut myself, to be very honest with you. I think that's something that is probably like very, very deeply buried. I have no recollection. The only person I do have a recollection of is my second older sister. And I remember her because she literally screamed the house down. And I now know why, because she suffered massive, massive, devastating side effects from her FGM. My grandmother had been so unhappy with the way the cutter had operated. She took matters into her own hands and decided she was going to do it. So literally, like both of them completely unqualified. Um, and I remember her so specifically because my mum even tells a story that she bled so much that they thought she was going to like hemorrhage. I think I remember my mum saying that when my dad had come home, because men couldn't be in the house when this happened. I remember my mum saying that when my dad had come home, he'd asked her like, "What the hell's going on?" Because my mum says that my sister she was just covered in blood, and obviously you can't get medical care because you know these girls are left to just to basically heal without any care. I don't need to tell you infections, all the rest of it. Oh God, sorry. Mm. So yeah, I just remember hers because it was so graphic. Um, and it was really cold. So I just remember her like saying that because she was wet, that she was really cold. Um, and just, yeah, there was a lot of blood. That's all I remember. It was just chaotic. And the craziest part is when this happens, life just continues. You're not like when you have any medical procedure, you kind of rest and you're taken care of. There's medicine, there's aftercare, but with FGM, it's so brutal that children, girl children, are kind of just expected to carry on, and you know, their bodies are left to just take care of themselves essentially, which is really really painful to think about. Given, I'm sure you know this. I'm sure most people who know about FGM know there's no anesthetic. This is a real like brutal procedure that just happens in the most sensitive area of your body. So I'm sure, and I say I'm sure because I can't remember, but I'm sure extremely painful physically and emotionally, mentally. It must just be, yeah, a very scary. I mean, I've had other people who remember their experiences, and I personally, I just can't connect with my experience. I can't remember. Yeah. Even though I have memories from even before that age, I have memories of, when my sister was born when I was 4. Um, but it's not a time I can even like really touch apart from my older sister.
Were you ever told what they're doing to you or why they were doing or what's going to happen?
No.
Was there ever a conversation?
No, there usually isn't. And I think as a girl in that environment, you kind of learn as you're being told things and the way you're raised and the language that is used, you kind of learned this is to control you. This is a tool to control you. The only time I realized, I guess kind of realized, because obviously it happened to me and then we came to the UK and we never ever spoke about it. I remember the first time I realized that it kind of came back to me. I think I was about 15, 14 maybe. And I was having my braces changed and I was in the hospital with my sister. And there was this big poster in St. George's in the toilet. And it was like a razor with all this blood on it. And I didn't understand the words female genital mutilation because I'd just recently come to the UK. I was still learning English. It was not words I'd ever come across. And I remember saying to my sister, "Have you seen that poster?" And she said, "Yeah, that's the thing that we had done." And that was the end of the conversation. It was kind of like, I think it kind of brought back something, but I was like, whoa,
So you didn't know you had that done until
no, no. I completely blocked it out. And it was only when I was pregnant with my son that I actually sat down with a professional, and she was like, let's get a mirror. Let me show you what has happened. So, like, this whole time, almost like 34 years of my life, I was living in my body, never had a clue what actually happened. Like, like literally had no idea what physically happened.
Until you were 34.
Yeah, until I was pregnant with my son. She was like, let's look at you. Look in the mirror. This is what's been cut. This is what happened. This is what was removed. And then I was like, oh wow, okay.
To me, that's shocking because obviously I met you before then, right? And you're someone who's been campaigning against child marriage, against FGM, against honor-based violence. You've been training police and other social workers across the UK. Like, you have spoken at the parliament. You're very outspoken and you're very aware. And to think that even after all of this time, you hadn't looked, you hadn't explored, is really shocking to me. What was it that had stopped you? Was it
I think it was such a hard thing to actually face because all my life I basically lived as if it didn't happen. And it like the opportunity never came up to discuss it because I don't know a single girl in my community who's not cut, especially like girls from my generation. I don't know a single girl, like our mums, all of us, we're all cut. So it was so normal to me, like everybody is cut. And it was so silent because it happens, but you don't speak about it. Literally, you just go back to normal life. And I think it was just a very, very difficult. Even now, sometimes I feel a bit like, oh my gosh, like that is something that actually happened to me. It's a hard thing to even now to kind of like, I guess, process and accept.
um I wonder, you said that the excuse, the reason people give for carrying out FGM is to control the girls, to prevent them from having sexual pleasure, to prevent them from going out and straying. I hate that word so much, but it's used so much in Iran and in our culture. Oh, she's straying. Um, did that stop you? Do you feel like FGM has ever prevented you from enjoying sex, from experiencing pleasure?
Yeah, definitely. I think you know, for the most part of my adulthood, it was about like pretending. Because the thing is, if you don't even have a relationship with your body, you kind of you're almost at arm's length. You don't even know the body that you live in. You can't experience pleasure. So I think for a long time, for me, it was about again, it was like this is what is perceived sexy, so I'll be sexy, and this is what's perceived pleasure. So we all know what perceived pleasure looks like, and for me, it was like, yeah, okay, I can do that. And it wasn't really about connecting with my body and actually experiencing real pleasure until much, much later in life and really understanding, okay, this again needs to come from a place of genuine pleasure, genuine joy, happiness, and comfort and consent. That was a really, really long journey for me. I had no idea that you know, sex could be about that. It just from what what I got, the understanding I got was it's something that women do, the act of sex for men. So women were not at the center of pleasure or even half. It wasn't a shared feeling of pleasure. This was about men and what women could offer to men.
It's so infuriating to hear that you and many other women, not just through FGM, but through so many other means that are put on us to control us through controlling our sexuality by making it transactional, is having such a huge impact and putting so much pain and pressure on our shoulders. So you left the environment in Iraq, Kurdistan, Iraq. You went to Iran as an immigrant. All of these pressures continued because, I mean, outside of the house, I don't even need to say I lived through it in Iran. All of the pressure, the propaganda, the shame is reinforced by the government, by the society, and then inside it's even more so. amplified in some ways. And then you moved to the UK in your early teens. And then you were forced to get married, aged 16. I know that this is a really difficult subject for you to talk about. Uh, it's difficult to hear it. Do you mind talking a little bit about how that came about and what
Mhm.
happened?
Sure. So when I was 15, I was on my GCSE revision leave. And I remember my mum coming to my bedroom and saying that, um, your dad wants to talk to you about something. And I said, okay. So my dad comes in, and this was like a really brief conversation. He basically says, there's someone that wants to marry you. And I had a very appropriate reaction. I kind of like said to him in a, kind of like childlike manner. I said, but I'm just 15 and I'm doing my GCSEs. And he said, okay. And he walked out and he left the room. And that had a massive impact on my relationship with him. So for the next few months, he basically wasn't talking to me. He completely ignored me. Every time I walked into a room, he would be like this. And so for him, like my reaction to the marriage proposal at 15 was completely out of order. Anyway, then not long after that, there started to be talks about my sister Banaz, who at this time was 17. And then she told me that basically my parents had told her she was going to get married. And I was like, what do you mean? And she was like, well, they said that there's a good man who's asked for my hand in marriage and I'm going to marry him. So it was already past the point of discussion. She got engaged and she had this big wedding party. And when that happened, about, I'd say like a month or two, my dad has gone to my mum again. And this time I'm 16. I've done my GCSEs and he's told my mum, tell her that there's somebody else now. And this time, trying to preserve like what I thought was like my relationship with my dad, love and like, like his attention, my immediate answer was, yeah, of course, whatever he wants to do. And those words literally changed my life. I will never forget that conversation. I still like it plays in my head because I literally said to my mom, like direct translation from Kurdish to English, whatever he wants to do, I'll do it if that's what he wants. And then literally like this, the arrangement started happening. He was coming to the house. My parents held a meeting. They told me to sit opposite him, not look at him, not talk to him. They told him like what a good girl I was, how I was going to be a good wife. It was very transactional. And basically, like from one day to the next, I was married.
How old was he?
So he was in his late 20s, almost 30.
Late 20s.
Yeah.
Tell me about your wedding night.
So there was quite a big build up. We had this big party. It's so hard to tell you my state of mind because I really, truly believed the party was going to happen and I was going back to my parents' house, even though I had packed bags. Party happened, and honestly, it was, I was just, it was a freak show. I just remember like my mum came and like whispered in my hair a few times and she said, your dad says you look too happy. So stop smiling so much. You're not supposed to be this happy about getting married. You're supposed to act a bit more like shy and that kind of like image that you're supposed to give, like no emotions, just be there. So I was like, okay, but obviously in my mind, like my friends are here, I'm being cheeky, like having pictures taken and there's music playing, but completely disconnected to the reality. So all that came to an end and I basically, next thing I know, I'm in the car alone with this guy who's my husband. And just to paint you the picture, Sahar, I have never spoken to a boy at this point in my life. I'm like, I've grown up, don't talk to boys, don't look at boys, don't even entertain this idea of men existing. And then, like, suddenly I'm with this stranger who's my husband. I just remember immediately, like, the difference in our vocabulary was so obvious because I remember he would be talking in the car and I was just like, what the fuck is this guy saying? This isn't even making sense to me. Like, I'm not used to talking to adults. This is grown adult conversation. So I didn't know where we were going, but apparently we were going to a hotel in Croydon, and this was classed basically our honeymoon. So we went to this hotel, and I was still in my white dress. And in this bag I had, it was like pajamas. And I remember at some point just wanting to like go and put my pajamas on, like very childish pajamas, also just to like paint the picture. But I remember he was like, come and sit on the bed for a second. And I sat on the bed, and he sat like on my left side, and he like took my hand and he started like stroking my hand and like talking to me about how much he loves me. And like literally, I can't even remember everything he said, but it was very weird, very out of nowhere. Bear in mind, I've never ever had a conversation with this man. It was just so full on.
Did you know what's expected of you during your wedding night? Did you know you're
No.
supposed to have sex?
No, I didn't know what sex was, but somebody, there was a female relative who was related to this man. She's like from the community. This woman, this older woman, I remember when I was packing for like to leave my parents' house on the day of the wedding night, she came to me and she was like, take this white sheet, put it in your bag and bring it back to your mum. I didn't know like what it was for. I just knew you had to be respectful when aunties speak to you. You just say, yes, auntie. I put it in my bag. I had no idea what this was for. No one actually spoke to me and explained to me. And I like later found out through being reprimanded by my mum that to basically prove that I was a virgin, to have sex with my husband on the white sheet and
The
to
white
show my
sheet
mum.
practice to
Yeah,
show the blood as a sign of honor that, yes, my hymen was intact all this time.
yeah.
Okay.
And that he has a good deal, that he doesn't need to return me to my parents. So that was his plan on the first night, which was completely like a shock to me. I couldn't even process that I was being like physically touched by this person. And I just remember like, like moving away from me and thinking, what the hell are you doing? Like, I don't even know you. This is wrong in itself. This was like my first interaction with him, and it kind of like set the tone for the marriage. He just went crazy on me. He just started screaming at me, cursing me. And he was like, I knew you were a piece of shit. I knew I should have never chosen you. Um, Bear in mind at this time, my one of my sisters had already gone into care, which is the reason I was forced into this marriage in the first place, to regain the family honor, because she had shamed the family, so to speak. So me and Banaz were kind of used to make up for what had happened with her. And so he was like, you're the sister of a whore. I know I shouldn't have married you. I knew messing with your family was wrong. Clearly, there's a reason you're not letting me near you. And he was insinuating, I later got to understand, he was basically insinuating I wasn't a virgin. That's why I wasn't letting him near me. But none of this was like clocking to me, because I didn't know what that even meant. So anyway, he left the room, and I had my Nokia phone, and I just remember like, okay, I'm going to text my older sister, who was still living with my parents, and basically saying to her, what time are you guys coming to get me? And it was already late now. It was like 1 a.m. And she didn't reply. So I remember I was on my own, by the way. He like literally slammed the door and left me alone in the hotel.
Just because you
Um,
refused to have sex with him or refused to let him touch you.
yeah, literally, he just like, I didn't understand that in that moment why he was behaving like that. But it's when I went back to my family home the next day, it like became apparent that I had rejected him. And so like when he came back, I think it was about 5 a.m. He's like, get ready. We're going to go back to your family's house. I've already called your mum. And I was just like, yes. I'd already like changed out of my wedding dress, and I like put it in a suitcase. I was all packed, ready to go, because in my head it's like, well, great, this is the outcome I want. I want to go home. So I remember we went home, and the first thing my mum was like, what the hell are you doing here? Do you know what this looks like? If somebody sees his car, it means that he's brought you back. If the groom returns the bride, there's only one reason he does that. You're not a virgin. And I'm just like, what? Like, literally none of this is even making sense. And then through the conversation, he explicitly told my mum that we were not officially husband and wife. And my mum was horrified. She was like, why? And I was like, I don't know what you want me to do. Like, I don't want to. I don't know him. And she was just like, I'm so ashamed of you. You need to fix this. There's a white sheet in your suitcase. Bring it back. He obviously knew what it was for. And we were sent away packing. So what happened next, like actually having physical sex, I did not know like what I was doing. I was just being told what to do. Now as an adult, it's like, it's just sickening. Like this adult was orchestrating literally a child into having non-consensual sex with them so that he can feed his ego and feel like I've got myself a virgin. It was just disgusting, just so abusive. And I think I've kind of like spoken about this before, but for me, like one of the hardest parts was I was just being led so blindly. And the only people that knew what I was being forced to do was the adults, including my mum.
They were
And I
taking
remember like,
part in that, which was
yeah,
essentially rape of a
mhm,
child.
yeah, and not even essentially, it was. I was 16 years old. I did not consent, never once throughout that marriage. And everybody was just, for their own egos, willing to watch this happen. And as a result of this, again, because I did not know what was going on, I did not know like sex meant, especially unprotected sex, that you would end up pregnant. I ended up getting pregnant at 16 and only knowing because my mum could see physically that I was pregnant. But there I was, like having morning sickness. I just remember like my trousers not being able to, but I couldn't connect these things. I'd only had my period for like 1 year. I was just like head in the clouds, being 16, pretending none of this was happening because all I care about is listening to my music and seeing my friends at college. Like all 16-year-olds, I was not in touch with reality at all, Sahar. I was this thing of like the two identities. It was very, very, very cutthroat and clear. I would wake up in the morning, I'd get dressed, I'd take off my wedding ring, I'd go to college, and for me, that life is behind me. I'm a different person. I'd get back on the bus, put my ring back on, go back home. I'm somebody's wife. Like I was shifting between really being a 16-year-old, just trying to enjoy my social life, college years and experiences, and then going back into my reality. And I think that's something that, we were talking about this before with the whole like being over sexualized and the confusion around your identity. Like it was always a big part of my coping mechanism. I always knew I wasn't happy with what I was living through. I just had to get by doing something else to find some sort of peace and joy. It was always battling both.
And of course, every time you got back home, you had to repeat this sexual act with this man. Did it, I mean, I don't know how to ask this. Is a child having non-consensual sex with a much older man because she's told to do it? Did it ever become easier? Did it ever become less disgusting?
No,
Less.
it was always repulsive, like literally. And I remember I would do things that in my head was like, okay, let me find ways to avoid this from happening. So I used to lie and say that I was on my period a lot of the time, which never mattered anyway. That was like, who cares? And then I remember um, sometimes, because obviously like he used to work, and sometimes I would basically pretend that I was sleeping. And so what he actually started doing is coming home earlier. I should also add, like he was an alcoholic, so that really added to his temper, his moods, his lack of ability to like control his behavior. But he was very comfortable, and I think this is the part that makes me probably the most sick. He was very comfortable to go openly to my parents, and this was happening all the time. And he would tell them that I basically was withholding sex from him. That that's not acceptable, and that one of the duties of a wife is to fill her husband. So you can obviously now like full circle why my complexity is around like being sexual or like using that as a tool of control, like we talked about in the beginning, like just became very, very complicated because that was a tool of abuse used against me.
Must have been so painfully isolating to not have anyone to turn to and to be forced into this abuse over and over again. And the only people you went to who could have protected you, your parents at the time, were a big part of the abuse. So you
Mhm.
said that shortly after your marriage, you got pregnant.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about the moment you found out that you are pregnant? How did you feel? What was going through your mind?
It, I think I just like really downplayed it. I remember I basically went to the GP, the family GP, and I said to her, "My mom thinks I'm pregnant." Like really childish, like just so like, so childlike because that's literally where I was at. Anyway, did the test. Test came back positive and she was like, "Yeah, you are pregnant." And I said, "Okay, well, how do you stop it?" And she said, "So you don't want the baby?" I said, "No, no, I don't want my baby. I hate my husband. I don't want a baby with him." And she said, "Well, you've got some options because you're far too late in your pregnancy. You need to have a termination." She gave me a booklet. I called the people. I told my family uh, very like boldly, "This is what I'm doing," and they were like, "No, absolutely not. This is their first grandchild, and you have to have this baby." And I said, "No." I put my foot down. I don't know how I got the strength, but all I can tell you is just remembering how that happened. I just was like, no. So I turned up at the appointment, and on the day of the termination, I remember my dad actually like practically begged me. He was like, "This is not good. You shouldn't do this." And I like nothing was going to stop me. I said, "No, I'm doing it." And then my husband actually drove me there again on the whole way, trying to blackmail me, telling me I shouldn't do it. I said, "No, I'm doing it." I got there and they were like, "You need to put this robe on and we need to put you to sleep." And I was just like, what does this mean? Didn't know what they were doing. I didn't actually know what the procedure was. It's only when I like woke up and realized, wow, this is really physically like such a big thing. But again, my fight or flight mode, part of like just getting by, surviving, just carried on as normal. So that was the thing that I took away from it is I could not be pregnant ever again. Ever, ever again.
And
But
then
I still like my relationship, at this point, sex, I didn't have any other kind of thoughts around sex other than it's just it's just what your husband does because he feels like it. This is not a two-way thing. This is just and it was actually explained to me like this, like you are your husband's property. You need to please your husband when he asks and when he wants. That was my understanding. So for me, like sex was just the most disgusting thing ever.
And what I'm hearing is that pregnancy was an extension of that, a more permanent extension of that, and which would solidify it forever.
Mm.
That marriage didn't last though. You ended up getting divorced.
I
What
did, thank God.
what happened? How did that come about? How did you manage it?
Um, so it actually happened in a very, I guess, bittersweet moment in my life. Um, so I mentioned too that Banaz was married just before me. So she was also going through the same kind of like horrific abuse, physical, sexual, emotional. And the thing is, it was no secret that we were both going through these kinds of abuse. Everybody knew. It was not a secret. And the solution was always you must be doing something to bring this onto yourself. Like people aren't crazy. This is your fault. That was always the solution. So one thing that would happen all the time is our husbands will basically come and complain to our parents and then our parents would side with them and then they would hold this kind of like meeting in their living room that this place that like literally became a hellhole that we'd be sitting on one side and my parents with our husbands sitting on the other side and you're basically on trial defending yourself. And this happened with her like again and again and again where she was starting to basically say that she's leaving her husband and they were like, "No, you're not leaving him. This is not happening." But eventually she stopped saying it and just did it. And she never came back to the house. So she went to my parents' house, and basically they kept trying to reconcile them and telling her to go back. But Banaz was firm. She was not going back. Um, and then within about, I'd say, a few months from that, she basically had a friend that she was talking to, a male friend who was Kurdish. And they then started a romantic relationship when she left her husband. But in the eyes of the Kurdish community, it doesn't matter if you've left your husband, you are still married, therefore you are still his property. So as far as they saw it, she was having an affair, even though she's left him and he's refusing to divorce her. So she's the culprit. She's basically doing something wrong. The word kind of got out like in the autumn, late autumn, that Banaz was seeing this guy, and things just escalated. She was going to the police and saying that people are following her. And then the real like sense of danger became very clear, that these threats were like real and everybody was hearing about it, and meetings were being had, and there was basically an attempt to kidnap her boyfriend. But for some reason, the police were just not taking any of this seriously. They just thought this is like some escalated version of the events that Banaz is saying. And then on New Year's Eve in 2005, basically Banaz had fled my grandmother's house because she says that there was an attempt on her life. And the police were called. She went to hospital, and turned out the police basically said that she was just a typical like drunk young person, and kind of like dismissed her completely. From this event, 24 days later, her boyfriend reported her missing. And from talking to me, Sahar, this is always the hardest part to get through or to even talk about, because I think no matter how many times I say it, it's still just is so raw and so difficult to even explain that something like this happened. So basically her boyfriend reported her missing, and he knew that something was wrong because him and Banaz had a system where they would contact each other every single day, like every hour, to make sure that they were safe, because they knew that their life was like in serious danger, and yet they didn't have anybody to turn to. So when her boyfriend reported her missing, um, it took some time, but the police eventually realized this was a really high risk, and launched basically a murder investigation. Within, I think, a few weeks, it was very clear that something very serious must have happened. Although we didn't know, but it became apparent 4 months later, after her boyfriend reported her, that the threats that she had been receiving, the people harassing her, the same people who were following her, basically had decided that what she did, which was to leave her abusive marriage and start a new relationship, was so dishonorable and so detrimental to them and their reputation that she had to die. And that's a decision they literally took into their own hands. So it's what I'm going to say sounds really ironic, but she basically lost her life for trying to have a life, because until that point, nothing she did was for herself or chosen by herself. She ended up losing everything that she fought for. When we started this conversation, we were talking about the control and the system that you grow up in and what you're taught about your worth. Ultimately, this is the full circle. This is the extreme end, that choosing what you want in your life costs your life.
Thank you so much for revisiting this unimaginably horrendous part of your life. I mean, I've spoken to you about this several times. I knew about this long before we met. There's been drama series made about it. There's been investigations made about it. I mean, Benaz's case led to the change in law, the fact that honor-based violence became something that the police are now having to be trained for, to look for. It changed things. Um, Going back to your story, how did that lead to your divorce?
So after Banaz's death, um, I think I saw my future because I always knew I need to get out of this marriage somehow, someday. And it's hard to word this, but I had to just use that moment to fight for my future. And there came a point where during the time that Banaz was missing, we had no idea where she was, if she was ever going to be found. But my husband, who was incredibly abusive and such a horrible person, he he would still insist on like forcefully having sex and still insist on being, being the person he was. And I would obviously push back and I would make excuses and stay with the family because of the constant police presence. And he would get upset. He would, curse me and he would call me names and say that I was a terrible wife. And I thought, okay, you know what? This is getting out of hand. And so I started kind of being a bit stronger and like sticking up for myself. And I remember the police had asked me if I felt safe in my home. And I said, no, I don't. And they said, "Oh, we can remove you from the house, blah, 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 witness protection." I said, "No, I'm not leaving my family." Like, this was a very difficult time already. So they said, "We can put a panic alarm in your home. If anything ever happens, press that panic alarm. The police will be there in 60 seconds." We lived very close to a police station at the time. So I remember I had this massive box, this panic alarm in the house. And he came home one day and he was like, "What is this?" And I said, "It's a recording device where the police can hear everything and see everything that's happening." And up until that moment, he had been saying to me sometimes when he was initiating sex, and I would say no, I would refuse. He would say things like, "You know what happened to your sister can easily happen to you." And I just knew I have to do something really extreme. This was obviously such a raw time, and he was using this to further like abuse me. So I said to him, this box was going to record everything that you say to me. And for him, that was the ultimate red line. He took me back to my parents and he said, "I don't want anything to do with her. I'm divorcing her." And I just thought, thank God, my prayers have been answered. I was over the moon, and my parents were like begging him and telling him that, we can work things out. And I was just like, no, I'm ready to. I want the divorce. I want it now. And I pushed and I pushed and I pushed. And eventually my parents agreed. And up until the last moment, because I had a Islamic marriage and a registered like legal marriage. And I remember when my parents called the imam, the same imam that married me. And sometimes I really hope that he can see some of the stuff that I do so he can just reflect on his stupid decisions and in facilitating marriages involving children. So he, in the very last moments where he was trying to do the divorce, he tried to persuade me. And he said to me that some of the issues your husband has with you are very unfair on him. He says to me that you withhold sex from him, and this is a sin. And I just remember saying to him, yeah, that is great for him. So can you just do this thing and just get it over and done with? And he obviously thought I was very disrespectful. He told my parents, she's rude, she's disrespectful. She answered back to me and she used some very harsh words because I said to him, I'm just going to make it very clear for you. I don't want to have sex with him. Does it make sense? That's where I stand. And he was just like horrified. Like, first of all, using the word sex in Kurdish and just telling him, like, I'm repulsed by this guy. He was just like, okay, she's a write off. She's got a foul mouth. And for me, that was like the result anyway. What I needed is for those men to just, be scared of me and leave me alone. And thank God I managed to get my divorce. And it was the most bittersweet time in my life. I was 18. Uh, I had just got my divorce and I was going to go to uni, and everything was happening at the same time as Banaz's funeral, whilst my dad was going to go on trial. There were just so many pivotal moments at the same time in the same month. And I found myself obviously celebrating, but mourning, but celebrating. Yeah, it was very confusing. I felt guilty for being happy, but I also felt like this is all I've wanted in those last 2 years. This was the best thing that could ever happen to me. But it was also hard to see it that way because it was such a tragic time.
And of course, your life went on. You didn't really speak out, but there was a point that you suddenly did a TED talk that went viral. Again, I saw that TED talk long before we met, and you spoke about your experience, you spoke about child marriage, you spoke about your sister, and that led to you campaigning against child marriages, campaigning against honor-based violence, something that continues to this day. And you spoke to some of the most influential people, and you ended up speaking at the parliament, you ended up speaking to world leaders, and you changed the law. You managed to change the law, and you managed to have so much impact by talking to the media, by talking to people that could influence or prevent things similar that happened to you and your family, to your sister. Tell me about that. How does it feel to have used everything you've been through to create so much change?
Honestly, Sahar, most days it's really hard to see it like that because I couple that with all the loss. Um, but so all these issues, I feel for me, it's almost like I've been trained. Everything I've ever lived in my life has trained me, whether it's been good or bad experiences, has trained me to do something with the voice that I was given. I don't believe I'm special, but I do believe that I didn't go through everything that I went through just to lead a life where I'm not doing everything I can to ensure that the same things don't happen to other families, to other girls, even if it's, one girl, two girls, somewhere in the world. I believe, as much as it's a very hard pill to swallow, there is a reason all these things happen to me. I mean, how many things can one person go through in their life? But I always try to see my experiences as a fuel for what I can give to the world and what I can do to make things better. So it's bittersweet, but it's a very humbling, inspiring journey to be on. And every day I meet women, especially people with lived experience. When I meet women from the same backgrounds as us and people who've got their own stories, it just reinforces this idea. Yeah, this is what you're supposed to be doing. This makes sense. This is where my heart lies. This work. I can't be doing anything else. There's no way. I just don't see it.
Paisley, I've known you for so long, and every time we speak, I am gobsmacked by your courage, by your resilience, by just your generosity of spirit, by your strength. And it's just such a pleasure. No, I mean it from very deep down. Like, it's such a pleasure to know you, let alone have you on this podcast. Like, your words, everything you say has so much power. And I hope that I think that everyone needs to hear it, because They need to. They have to. And thank you so much on behalf of all women for everything that you're doing. Just be respectful of your time. I can talk to you forever. You said that after everything you've been through, especially most of it because of sex, from the time where you were told to be ashamed, not to open your legs, not to laugh too loud when you were a little girl, to when you grow older and you weren't allowed to ride a bike, God forbid you might break your hymen, to being forced to not have a voice, to be forced into marriage, to be raped, to be abused, to not be protected, lose your sister in such a way, all because of control of your sexuality as a woman. It meant that once you were out of all of this, you became promiscuous. You tried to dress up or you flirt or do all of those things. And you had promised yourself you'll never have a child. But then now you're almost 40. You've changed the laws and you have a gorgeous 4-year-old with a, an amazing, beautiful husband.
How did we get here?
How did we get here?
Um, honestly, I think just to address like becoming a mum, it really was never ever part of my plans. I think my first time being pregnant was just such a devastating experience. My son was, I believe, literally like my final gift from God. Sometimes I say he's my final test, but I think he's I think he's for me he was like kind of the cherry, the cherry on the icing on the cake, or whatever you say, the expression. But he kind of like just completed everything, because I really thought that I had identity crisis. I had, difficulty navigating certain emotions, but then becoming a mum, it just changed everything for me. It just made me really look through, first of all, my life, my childhood, my family, life in general, with a complete different set of eyes. Actually, I owe it to him to say, he brought out so much compassion in me. I never knew you can love so much. I never knew love could be. I hope one day he listens to this. But I just never knew love could be so. People say a child's love is so pure, but it's more than that. It fulfills me in a way that just feels like. So this is what it was supposed to feel like, from child to parent, and this is how a child is supposed to be nurtured. And it really feels like, in so many ways, that I get to help to nurture him, or to give him a childhood that I didn't have. And it's such a big, big responsibility. But I also feel so lucky that I can do certain things in the way I can for him because of my own experiences. And I feel like everything did a full circle in becoming a mom to my son. And I'm just so proud of like who he is. And I just love that I get to experience life through his eyes, and it's the most precious, beautiful thing. Gives me so much hope. So I wasn't sure, when I was pregnant, I wasn't sure if it was the right choice, but I think it was meant to be. And it's such a beautiful, chaotic, challenging, fun, energetic, crazy experience. Yeah, it's definitely one for the books. I'm loving it, but it's crazy.
It sounds so good to hear that, especially because I have some issues around having children. I always worry that I'm going to bring the messed up parts of my past into it. I'm worried selfishly that by bringing a child into the world, I'm going to stop myself from living a life. And also, I've always weirdly associated motherhood and having children with the end of my sexuality, with the end of not just my career, but also like being a sexual being or being desired, because you don't grow up thinking moms are sexy. And how has that been for you? Like after everything you've been through and trying to still work through your sexuality as a woman, as a sexual being, and also becoming a mother, how what has that done?
Well, to be honest with you, everything you mentioned, like your fears, I think they're completely valid and also very relatable because I definitely worried, like, becoming a mom. You hear about like the roommate stage and people like struggling through that. It's real. Like that stuff is real. I mean, how do you feel sexy when you've been up all night, maybe breastfeeding and changing a baby and with no sleep and you're running on 3 coffees already by 10 a.m. How the hell do you feel sexy having not having showered in 3 days? So it has been, and I think it still is a challenge because you also are accepting and growing into your new body. Pregnancy changes a lot of things and things feel different. Things are just naturally, like your body looks different. The way that you might feel during your sexual interactions are very different. I mean, for me personally, one of like, this is a strange complex, but when I was breastfeeding, all of a sudden for me, it was like my breasts are like a no-go area now. This is my baby's food. You just have so many questions and so many kind of complexities to navigate once you start that journey of parenthood, but still trying to remain sexy. So honestly, I think it took me, I'm going to say a year to 2 years to fully feel, oh, I can dress up, I can feel sexy, I feel comfortable with my partner, I can get back into the swing of things. It took time. And even now there's patches and you have moments where it's that feeling of sexiness is pretty non-existent because you're running around in joggers and who's got time to be sexy? But I think, it's obviously very important to because being sexy makes us feel good. And it's not just about, and I think that's where my kind of healthy associations with feeling sexy and sex all kind of play out as I get older, because it's not just about being sexy for my partner. It's also for me, like, am I feeling sexy? What makes me feel sexy? Is it that scent, or is it wearing this at home, or is it doing my hair like this, wearing a red lipstick? So just like being a bit more intentional as opposed to like, maybe in my 20s, I thought, oh, if I just throw on a boob tube, I'm super sexy. So it's a lot more than just surface level. But for me now, feeling sexy is like if I've been to the gym, I feel good in my body. I've had a, nice everything shower and I'm able to, have my interaction with my person in a way that it feels sexy for me and for him. And it's like a mutual exchange of energies. It's very mutual. It's very healthy, and it's for me. It's just been growing into that space. But mothers will tell you. I'm sure fathers too. It's a challenge. Feeling sexy after motherhood and different experiences, especially sexual abuse. It's a real challenge, and you definitely have moments where you just feel like, nah,
And how great that now you have a choice and a safe space to do it. And it's
yeah,
so empowering to hear that you have, in a way, reclaimed your own sexuality through knowing and
mhm,
practicing your choice. I do it
yeah.
because it feels good. I do it because it feels safe. It feels
Mhm.
sexy for me, not to others, but to me. Payzee isn't just a very good friend, but she's also someone who truly embodies fighting back and reclaiming her freedoms in a world that keeps trying to take it away, not just for herself, but for others also. And for me personally, every time I speak to her, I'm so inspired. And today in particular, our conversation has made me reflect back on my own struggles around sex and sexuality. Also, thinking back to how she's been through so much pain, so much injustice, so much. And she's managed to come out of it, but uses that to keep fighting for others and for herself. And also, it's kind of nice to see that she shared the same fears as me about becoming a mother, and the fact that motherhood didn't take away her sexuality, but in many ways it seems like it's enhanced it by giving her a certain confidence that perhaps she felt she was lacking before. Something tells me this is not going to be the last time she's on the show. For now, this is all we have time for. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for being with us. I hope that you've been as inspired as I always am after speaking to Payzee. I'm going to put some information about her and link to her social media on the show's description in case you wanted to check her out. She's also all over the internet, so I would really spend some time to look at her work. And yeah, you can follow us. You can check the rest of our program, the rest of our episodes out on our TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. I would love to hear from you. We read every single comment. Thank you so much for all the kind words so far. Let's keep the conversation going. Let me know how you have reclaimed your own sexual freedom, or perhaps share your experience of how it was taken away.